students filmed the alien girl eating from the floor until one human knelt down to join her. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The sterile corridors of Evergreen Academy buzzed with excitement and trepidation. It was the first day of the Galactic Integration Program, and Earth's prestigious boarding school had welcomed its inaugural class of non-human students from across the known universe. Students filmed the alien girl eating from the floor until one human knelt down to join her. This incident, captured on countless holographic devices and shared throughout the school's communication network, would change not only the lives of those directly involved, but the future of interspecies relations throughout the galaxy. But to understand how we arrived at this pivotal moment, we must first rewind to how it all began. 3 months earlier, the announcement had sent shockwaves through human society. After decades of careful diplomatic negotiations following first contact, the Galactic Council had finally approved Earth for limited integration status. As part of this historic arrangement, 50 non-human adolescents from various species would be sent to study alongside human teenagers at 5 specially selected educational institutions around the world. Evergreen Academy in the Pacific Northwest of North America was chosen as the flagship institution for this program. Nestled among ancient forests and boasting state-of-the-art facilities, the boarding school had a reputation for academic excellence and progressive values. The school administration scrambled to prepare for their extraterrestrial guests, retrofitting dormitories with specialized environmental controls and training staff in xenobiology and interspecies cultural sensitivity. Blake Turner, 17 and entering his final year at Evergreen, watched the preparations with mild interest but little enthusiasm. Tall with perpetually messy brown hair and intelligent hazel eyes, Blake had more pressing concerns than alien classmates. His application to the prestigious aerospace engineering program at Massachusetts Institute of Technology was due in 4 months, and his entire future hinged on securing one of their coveted spots. "Can you believe this?" his roommate Ethan Cole said, scrolling through his tablet as they lounged in their dormitory room the night before classes began. "They've assigned me to be a cultural liaison for some fish person from Aquaria. I'm supposed to help them navigate the complexities of human social structures." He looked up with a grimace. "I can barely navigate human social structures myself." Blake chuckled, attention fixed on the complex orbital mechanics problem set he was working on. "At least you'll have something unique for your college essays." "True," Ethan conceded. "What about you? Did you get assigned anyone?" "Nope," Blake replied, relieved. Apparently, they didn't have enough aliens to go around. "Lucky," Ethan muttered, then paused as he scanned another message. "Oh wait. They're holding an orientation mixer tomorrow night. Mandatory attendance for all students. There goes my plan to get ahead on calculus." Blake groaned. Social functions were not his forte, especially ones that involved making small talk with beings from other planets. "Great. I can't wait to accidentally offend someone by breathing in their direction or making eye contact for too long." "Come on. It might be interesting," Ethan countered. "Think about it. These beings come from worlds we've only seen in simulations. Different atmospheres, different biologies, different cultures. Aren't you even a little curious?" Blake shrugged. "Sure, academically speaking. But I've got other priorities right now." What Blake didn't share with his friend was the pressure weighing on him. His parents, both accomplished aerospace engineers working on the new generation of interstellar vehicles, expected him to follow in their footsteps. His acceptance to MIT was considered a foregone conclusion in his family. Anything less would be a disappointment. With that expectation came countless hours of advanced coursework, specialized projects, and very little time for distractions, even interesting, alien-shaped ones. The next morning, Blake woke early as usual and headed to the campus cafeteria before it filled with the typical breakfast rush. He liked the quiet of early mornings, the opportunity to collect his thoughts before the day's chaos began. The cafeteria staff was still setting up when he arrived, but a few early risers had already claimed tables. Blake grabbed a tray and selected his usual breakfast, oatmeal, fruit, and coffee, before seeking out an empty table by the windows overlooking the forest. As he ate, he reviewed his schedule for the day on his tablet. Advanced physics, multivariable calculus, aerospace engineering principles, and galactic civilizations, a new required course for all seniors in light of the integration program. He sighed at this last addition, another distraction from his carefully planned curriculum. "May I sit here?" A melodic voice interrupted his thoughts. Blake looked up to find a human girl he didn't recognize standing by his table, tray in hand. She had shoulder-length dark hair with a streak of blue, warm brown eyes, and an easy smile. Not a returning student, he guessed, but one of the new transfers. "Sure," he replied, gesturing to the empty chairs. "Thanks. I'm Madison Grant, new senior transfer." She confirmed his suspicion as she set down her tray. "Everyone seems to know each other already, and I'm feeling a bit out of place." "Blake Turner," he introduced himself. "Don't worry, the alien students will be arriving today, so everyone will be feeling out of place soon enough." Madison laughed, a genuine sound that made Blake smile despite himself. "Fair point, though I'm actually looking forward to meeting them. That's partly why I transferred here. The Galactic Integration Program sounded fascinating." "You transferred specifically for the aliens?" Blake asked, surprised. "For the opportunity," Madison corrected, taking a bite of her toast. "My parents are xenoanthropologists. I grew up listening to their theories about extraterrestrial cultures. Now I get to study them firsthand instead of just reading reports." Her eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "Plus, it looks great for university applications. I'm hoping to get into the diplomatic corps eventually." Blake nodded. That, at least, he understood, strategic planning for future career goals. "Smart move. What about you? Excited about our new classmates?" Madison asked. Before Blake could answer, a commotion at the cafeteria entrance drew their attention. A group of students had gathered, phones and tablets raised to record something. "What's going on?" Madison wondered, craning her neck to see. Blake shrugged, but his curiosity got the better of him. He stood for a better view, and what he saw made him freeze. Their alien classmates had arrived. The first to enter the cafeteria was unmistakably Aquarian. Humanoid, but with iridescent blue-green skin, gill-like structures on their neck, and webbed hands. They were accompanied by a human staff member who was pointing out different areas of the cafeteria. Behind them came two beings that Blake recognized as Centaurians from their distinctive forearms and copper-toned skin that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Their movements were fluid, almost dance-like, as they navigated the unfamiliar space. Next entered a trio of Proxians, short in stature with large, expressive eyes that changed color based on their emotional state. Their eyes currently swirled with greens and purples, curiosity and apprehension, if Blake remembered correctly from the orientation materials they'd been given. "Wow," Madison breathed beside him, having also stood for a better look. "This is incredible." But it was the last being to enter that truly caught Blake's attention. She, at least Blake assumed it was a she based on general body structure, was unlike any species he had studied in their xenobiology preparatory materials. Tall and slender with pale, almost translucent skin that had a subtle lilac hue. Her hair, if it could be called that, seemed to float around her head like gossamer threads in water, shifting between shades of silver and lavender. Most striking were her eyes, large, almond-shaped, and entirely black, save for tiny pinpricks of light that seemed to mirror the stars themselves. She moved with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly, her steps light as if gravity affected her less than others. But despite her ethereal appearance, she looked decidedly uncomfortable, her gaze darting nervously around the crowded space. "I don't recognize her species," Madison murmured. "She's not in any of the orientation materials." Blake nodded, equally perplexed. Maybe she's from one of the newer member worlds? As they watched, the alien girl separated from the group, moving hesitantly toward the food service area. The cafeteria staff seemed equally uncertain how to interact with her, gesturing to different food options with awkward smiles. Eventually, the girl selected several items that Blake couldn't identify from his distance and turned to survey the cafeteria. Every table was now occupied, many students openly staring or discreetly recording the alien newcomers on their devices. Blake felt a sudden impulse to wave her over, to offer her a seat at their table, but something held him back. Before he could overcome his hesitation, the alien girl did something unexpected. Instead of approaching any of the tables, She gracefully lowered herself to the floor, sitting cross-legged with her tray placed before her. Then, to the astonishment of everyone watching, she leaned forward and began to eat directly from her plate without using any utensils, her face just inches from her food. A wave of whispers and suppressed laughter spread through the cafeteria. More devices were raised to record the strange behavior. Blake saw several students at nearby tables sharing the video clips with barely contained amusement. "What is she doing?" someone nearby whispered loudly. "Eating like an animal," another replied with a snicker. Blake felt a twinge of discomfort at their reactions. The alien girl seemed oblivious to the attention, continuing to eat in her unusual manner with apparent contentment. "Maybe that's normal where she comes from," Madison suggested quietly. "Different species, different customs." Blake nodded, but remained silent, watching as more students gathered to observe and record the spectacle. The alien girl finally seemed to notice the attention, her star-flecked eyes lifting to take in the circle of recording devices surrounding her. Her gossamer hair seemed to flatten against her head, and her already pale skin took on an even more translucent quality. She was afraid, Blake realized with a jolt. Or embarrassed. Or both. "This isn't right," Madison murmured, her expression troubled. "Someone should do something." Blake agreed, but again found himself frozen with indecision. He wasn't a confrontational person by nature, preferring to focus on his own goals rather than involve himself in others' situations. But the growing crowd and the increasingly obvious distress of the alien girl tugged at him. Before he could decide on a course of action, Madison made the decision for both of them. With determined steps, she walked directly toward the circle of onlookers, Blake trailing behind her almost reflexively. "Excuse me," Madison said firmly, pushing through the ring of students. "Give her some space, please." The students reluctantly stepped back, though many continued filming. Madison knelt down beside the alien girl, who watched her with those star-filled eyes, her gossamer hair now almost completely flat against her skull. "Hi there," Madison said gently. "I'm Madison. What's your name?" The alien girl tilted her head slightly, then responded in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. "Lyra. My designation is Lyra." "It's nice to meet you, Lyra," Madison smiled. "Is it all right if I sit with you?" Lyra's eyes widened slightly, pinpricks of light shifting within the darkness. "You wish to share sustenance space?" "Yes, if that's okay with you," Madison confirmed. After a moment's consideration, Lyra nodded. This would be acceptable. Without hesitation, Madison settled herself on the floor across from Lyra, crossing her legs to mirror the alien's position. She placed her own tray on the floor between them. Blake stood watching, both impressed by Madison's boldness and uncertain what to do himself. The crowd of onlookers had grown quiet, many looking uncomfortable or ashamed now that one of their own had broken ranks to show kindness. Then, to his own surprise as much as anyone else's, Blake found himself stepping forward and kneeling down beside them. "Room for one more?" he asked quietly. Madison smiled at him with approval, while Lyra studied him with curious intensity. "You are also willing to share sustenance space?" she asked. "Yes," Blake said simply, lowering himself to sit cross-legged on the floor and placing his tray before him. A ripple of whispers passed through the watching students. Blake ignored them, focusing instead on Lyra, who was observing him with fascination. "I am Blake," he introduced himself. "It's nice to meet you, Lyra." For the first time, the gossamer strands of Lyra's hair lifted slightly, waving gently as if caught in a breeze only she could feel. "Your designation is acceptable. You may call me Lyra." Blake wasn't entirely sure if this was a standard greeting or a special honor, but he nodded solemnly. "Thank you." A moment of awkward silence followed as the three of them sat there, the focus of every eye in the cafeteria. "So, Lyra," Madison began conversationally, as if sitting on the cafeteria floor was the most normal thing in the world, "what classes are you taking this semester?" As Lyra began to respond, her melodic voice discussing earth sciences and comparative literature with surprising enthusiasm, Blake became aware of movement around them. A few other students, perhaps encouraged by his and Madison's example, were cautiously approaching. One of them, a girl Blake recognized as Rachel Carter from his advanced physics class, hesitantly knelt down near their impromptu circle. "Hi," she said, her voice soft but determined. "I'm Rachel. Can I join you?" Lyra's star-filled eyes regarded her for a long moment before she nodded. "You may share sustenance space, Rachel." Within minutes, their circle had grown to include 5 humans and 3 other alien students, one of the Centaurians and 2 Proxians, all sitting on the floor, eating and attempting conversation despite language barriers and cultural differences. The crowd of onlookers gradually dispersed, many looking thoughtful or embarrassed as they returned to their tables. A few continued to record, but now it seemed less mockery and more documentation of a historic moment, the first true social integration between humans and aliens at Evergreen Academy. As Blake listened to Lyra explain the significance of shared meals in her culture, apparently eating from the floor was a sign of humility and community, a way of connecting with the earth of a planet. He caught Madison's eye across their circle. She gave him a small smile that somehow conveyed both approval and something deeper, a recognition of shared values perhaps. Blake returned the smile, realizing that for the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about MIT applications or orbital mechanics or his parents' expectations. Instead, he was fully present in this moment, listening to a being from another world talk about her customs while sitting on a cafeteria floor. It wasn't at all how he'd expected his day to go, but as he observed the genuine curiosity and cautious friendliness developing within their little circle, he had to admit, it was infinitely more interesting than his original plans. The floor-sitting incident, as it came to be known, spread far beyond Evergreen Academy's walls by lunchtime. Video clips circulated on social media, news outlets picked up the story, and heated debates erupted online about cultural sensitivity, human hospitality, and the challenges of true integration. For Blake, however, the day continued with surprising normalcy. He attended his classes, took detailed notes, and participated in discussions as usual. The only difference was that now, wherever he went, people looked at him with newfound interest or respect. A few classmates even approached him between periods to ask about Lyra and her culture. "I honestly don't know much," he admitted each time. "We only just met." By the time his last class of the day arrived, the new Galactic Civilizations course, Blake was actually looking forward to learning more. He entered the classroom to find it arranged differently than the standard Evergreen lecture halls. Instead of rows facing forward, the desks were arranged in a circle, with the instructor's podium set as part of the ring rather than at the front. Madison was already there, chatting animatedly with one of the Centaurians who had joined their floor circle at breakfast. She waved Blake over to an empty desk beside her. "How's your day been so far?" she asked as he sat down. "Mine's been surreal. People I've never spoken to keep coming up to thank me or ask questions about Lyra." "Same here," Blake admitted. "I didn't expect to become the alien expert after one awkward breakfast." Madison laughed. "I know, right? By the way, this is Tarek." She gestured to the Centaurian beside her. "He's in my comparative literature class too." The Centaurian inclined his copper-toned head, all 4 hands making a complex gesture that Blake assumed was a greeting. "Well met, Blake Turner. Your actions this morning showed wisdom." Before Blake could respond, the classroom door opened again and Lyra entered, her gossamer hair flowing more freely now, suggesting she was more at ease than she had been that morning. Her star-filled eyes scanned the room until they found Blake and Madison, and she moved gracefully toward them. "Greetings," she said, her wind chime voice carrying in the now-quiet classroom. "May I occupy the learning space near you?" "Of course," Blake replied, indicating the empty desk on his other side. "Please join us." As Lyra settled beside him, Blake noticed other students watching with various expressions: curiosity, apprehension, and in some cases, what looked like respect. The morning's events had clearly shifted something in the school's dynamics. Their instructor arrived moments later, Dr. Elena Reyes, a renowned xenoanthropologist who had been part of Earth's first diplomatic mission to the Galactic Council. She was a petite woman with silver-streaked dark hair and keen eyes that missed nothing. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, surveying the mixed group of human and alien students with evident satisfaction. "Welcome to Galactic Civilizations. This course will be unlike any other in your academic experience thus far, as we will be learning not just from texts and simulations, but from each other." Her gaze swept the circle. Looking around this room, I see representatives from 6 different worlds, each with unique biological characteristics, cultural frameworks, and historical perspectives. Dr. Reyes moved to her podium but remained standing. I had planned an introductory exercise today to break the ice, but I understand that some of you have already begun the process of cultural exchange. Her eyes twinkled as they rested briefly on Blake, Madison, and Lyra. The incident in the cafeteria this morning is actually a perfect case study to begin our discussions. Blake felt his face warm as attention shifted his way. Communication across species lines involves more than language, Dr. Reyes continued. It requires openness, vulnerability, and a willingness to step outside one's comfort zone. This morning, we saw examples of both failure and success in this arena. She activated the holographic projector at the center of the circle, and to Blake's dismay, footage from the cafeteria appeared. Lyra eating alone on the floor, students filming and laughing, then Madison approaching, followed by Blake and eventually others. With the permission of those involved, Dr. Reyes added, nodding toward Lyra, I would like to use this as our first discussion point. What cultural misunderstandings occurred here? What assumptions were made on both sides? And most importantly, what allowed for the eventual positive outcome? For the next hour, the class engaged in a surprisingly deep analysis of the morning's events. Lyra explained that in her culture, she was from a world called Lysithea, a name Blake hadn't even heard before. Communal meals were sacred occasions where status and hierarchy were temporarily suspended. Eating from the floor or ground was a way to honor the planet providing sustenance and to symbolize equality among all present. On Lysithea, only during sustenance sharing do our elders and leaders sit at the same level as younglings and servants, Lyra explained, her star-filled eyes serious. It is our most important cultural practice for building community cohesion. One of the human students, a boy named Nathan Brooks whom Blake knew from previous classes, asked hesitantly, Did you know that humans usually eat at tables? Were you confused when you saw everyone else doing something different? Lyra's gossamer hair rippled in what Blake was beginning to recognize as her equivalent of a nod. I received orientation about human consumption practices, but the materials indicated that humans value authenticity and cultural exchange. I believed demonstrating my cultural practice would be welcomed as educational. There was an uncomfortable silence as students absorbed this. The aliens had been encouraged to share their cultures, yet when one did so, she had been met with mockery rather than interest. This illustrates an important point, Dr. Reyes noted. Often in cross-cultural encounters, we say we want authenticity, but what we actually want is familiarity with a dash of exotic elements that don't challenge our own norms too deeply. Madison raised her hand. So what's the solution? Should visitors always conform to the dominant culture's practices? That's the central question of this entire course, Dr. Reyes smiled. And there's no simple answer. Cultural exchange requires negotiation and compromise on all sides. But perhaps more importantly, it requires what you demonstrated this morning. The willingness to step outside your cultural comfort zone to create a shared space. The discussion continued, with both human and alien students offering perspectives. Blake found himself unusually engaged, asking questions and offering observations. The theoretical problems of cultural integration suddenly felt very real and immediate when sitting beside beings from other worlds. When class ended, Blake realized with surprise that he had taken fewer notes than usual, but had perhaps learned more than in any other class that day. As students gathered their materials, Dr. Reyes approached him, Madison, and Lyra. I want to thank you 3 for providing such a valuable learning opportunity, she said. What happened this morning could have ended very differently without your intervention. Her gaze focused on Blake and Madison. You showed remarkable cultural sensitivity for students with limited extraterrestrial exposure. I just did what seemed right, Madison replied with a modest shrug. It wasn't anything special. Dr. Reyes smiled knowingly. Sometimes the most important cultural breakthroughs come from people simply doing what seems right in the moment. History is full of such examples. She turned to Lyra. And you showed great courage in sharing your practices despite the risk of misunderstanding. That's equally valuable. Lyra's gossamer hair lifted and swirled in what Blake was beginning to interpret as pleasure or pride. I am grateful for the acceptance shown by Madison and Blake. It was unexpected but most welcome. As they left the classroom together, Blake found himself wondering about Lyra's world and culture. The orientation materials had covered the major species in the Galactic Council, but Lysithians hadn't been included. Your home sounds fascinating, he said as they walked. I'd like to learn more about it sometime. Lyra's star-filled eyes regarded him with what seemed like surprise. Truly? You wish to learn of Lysithea? Of course, Blake nodded. That's part of what this integration program is about, right? Learning from each other. Few show interest in Lysithea, Lyra said softly. We are a small world with limited strategic value to the Council. Our inclusion in the integration program was unexpected. Madison, walking on Lyra's other side, frowned slightly. That doesn't seem fair. Size and strategic value shouldn't determine a culture's worth. And yet, they often do, Lyra replied with a wisdom that seemed beyond her apparent age. In the greater galaxy, as on your Earth. There was something in her tone that made Blake curious. How much do you know about Earth, Lyra? Her hair rippled in what he now recognized as amusement. More than most humans suspect. My species has been observing Earth for many cycles before official first contact was established. Blake and Madison exchanged surprised glances. This wasn't information that had been shared in any of their briefing materials. Why were you observing us? Madison asked. Humans are interesting, Lyra replied after a thoughtful pause. You develop in unexpected patterns. Most species follow predictable technological and social evolution trajectories. Humans do not. Blake wasn't sure whether to take this as a compliment or concern. Is that good or bad? Lyra's star-filled eyes seemed to study him more intensely. It is neither. It simply is. But it makes humans objects of great curiosity and some debate within the Council. Your inclusion was not unanimous. This revelation sent a small chill through Blake. He had assumed, as had most Earth citizens, that humanity's admission to the galactic community had been welcomed by all. The idea that some species had opposed it raised uncomfortable questions. Before he could pursue this line of thought, they reached a junction in the corridor where they needed to part ways. Blake to the science wing for an additional lab session, Madison and Lyra to the humanities building for their literature seminar. We're all attending the orientation mixer tonight, right? Madison asked. We could meet up there and continue this conversation. That would be acceptable, Lyra agreed, her hair swirling gently. I would enjoy further exchange. Blake found himself nodding. Sure, sounds good. The assignment he had planned to work on could wait one night. As he watched them walk away, Blake realized something had shifted in his priorities today. The MIT application and his parents' expectations still mattered, of course, but suddenly they weren't the only things on his horizon. The galaxy had quite literally opened up before him, raising questions he had never considered and offering possibilities he hadn't imagined. With that thought lingering in his mind, he turned toward the science wing, already looking forward to the evening's mixer with an enthusiasm that surprised him. The orientation mixer was held in Evergreen's central atrium, a spacious area with a glass ceiling that offered a clear view of the night sky. Blake arrived to find the space transformed. Soft ambient lighting, refreshment stations offering both Earth cuisine and specially prepared alien foods, and atmospheric music that somehow managed to be pleasant to multiple species' auditory systems. Faculty circulated among the students, encouraging interaction between humans and aliens. Blake spotted Dr. Reyes deep in conversation with one of the Aquarians, both gesturing animatedly about something. He scanned the crowd for Madison and Lyra but didn't immediately see them. Instead, he found his roommate Ethan near one of the refreshment tables, looking uncomfortable as he attempted conversation with his assigned Aquarian student. Hey, Blake greeted them, grabbing a beverage that looked safe for human consumption. How's it going? Blake. Thank goodness, Ethan said with evident relief. This is Marin. Marin, this is my roommate Blake Turner. The Aquarian turned iridescent blue-green features toward Blake. Close up, he could see that what he had taken for scales were actually tiny feather-like structures that shifted color slightly as they caught the light. You are the floor sitter, Marin said, recognition in their large, liquid eyes. Your actions are being discussed among all non-human students. Blake felt his face warm. It wasn't a big deal. I was just trying to make Lyra feel welcome. It was significant, Marin countered, their feather scales rippling in a pattern Blake couldn't interpret. Such gestures of cultural accommodation are rare from dominant species. Dominant? Blake questioned. I wouldn't say humans are dominant. We're the newcomers to the Galactic Council. Marin made a burbling sound that might have been laughter. Numerical status and temporal membership are not the only measures of dominance. Humans have a presence that exceeds your official standing. Before Blake could ask what they meant, he spotted Madison entering the atrium with Lyra and another alien he didn't recognize, a being with bark-like skin and branch-like appendages that moved with surprising grace. He excused himself from Ethan and Marin and made his way across the room. Madison saw him approaching and waved, her face lighting up with a smile that made Blake's step falter momentarily. He hadn't noticed earlier how her eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when she smiled genuinely, or how the blue streak in her hair complemented her warm complexion. Blake, there you are, she called as he reached them. This is Thorn, one of the arboreals from Sylvan. Thorn, this is Blake Turner, who I was telling you about. The bark-skinned being inclined their upper body in what seemed to be a formal greeting. Your reputation precedes you, Blake Turner. Your actions this morning have sparked much discussion. So I've heard, Blake replied, feeling slightly uncomfortable with all the attention his simple act of sitting on the floor was receiving. I hope it's positive discussion. Predominantly, Thorn assured him, voice rustling like leaves in a breeze. Though some question your motivations. Blake blinked in surprise. My motivations? I was just being friendly. Lyra's gossamer hair rippled in what Blake was beginning to interpret as gentle amusement. Not all species are accustomed to altruistic gestures from unfamiliar beings. Some suspect political maneuvering or attempt to calculate potential gain. That's kind of sad, Madison commented, taking a sip from her glass. The idea that simple kindness would be suspicious. Thorn's branches shifted in what might have been a shrug. In a galaxy of diverse interests and limited resources, skepticism often has survival value. The conversation might have continued in this philosophical vein, but they were interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Reyes, accompanied by a tall, distinguished-looking human man whom Blake didn't recognize. Good evening, students, Dr. Reyes greeted them. I'm glad to see cross-species socialization happening naturally. I wanted to introduce you to a special guest. This is Ambassador Thomas Collins from Earth's Diplomatic Corps. He's here to observe our integration program's progress. The ambassador smiled warmly at their group. I'm particularly pleased to meet you three, he said, nodding to Blake, Madison, and Lyra. Your cafeteria cultural exchange has already reached diplomatic channels. Small gestures often have larger implications than we realize in the moment. Blake shifted uncomfortably. It really wasn't planned or anything profound, sir. It just seemed like the right thing to do. The most authentic diplomatic breakthroughs rarely come from careful planning, Ambassador Collins replied. They come from genuine human, or in this case, sentient, connection. He turned to Lyra with evident curiosity. I understand you're from Lysithea? We have limited contact with your world. Lyra's star-filled eyes regarded the ambassador with an intensity that made Blake wonder what she was seeing that others might miss. Yes, my world values privacy and limited engagement. Our participation in this program represents a significant policy shift. One we very much welcome, the ambassador assured her. I hope it leads to deeper relations between our worlds. As the conversation continued, Blake found his attention drawn to the subtle dynamics between the various beings. The ambassador, while perfectly cordial, directed most of his questions to Lyra rather than Thorn, suggesting a particular interest in Lysithea. Dr. Reyes watched the interactions with the keen eye of a researcher, occasionally making almost imperceptible notes on her tablet. And Madison seemed to be observing everything with the focused attention of someone memorizing details for future reference. When the ambassador and Dr. Reyes eventually moved on to speak with other students, Madison leaned closer to their small group. Did anyone else find that a little strange? The ambassador seemed really interested in Lysithea specifically. Thorn's bark-like features shifted in what Blake was beginning to recognize as their equivalent of a nod. The presence of a high-ranking diplomatic official at a school function is unusual. His focus on Lyra, even more so. Lyra herself seemed unperturbed, her gossamer hair flowing serenely around her head. Lysithians are accustomed to curiosity from other species. We reveal little and observe much, a practice that often provokes interest. Blake was about to ask what she meant when a commotion near the main entrance drew everyone's attention. A group of older students, seniors like themselves, but not ones Blake recognized from his classes, had entered and were making their way through the crowd with an air of entitlement that set his teeth on edge. "Who are they?" Madison murmured. "Legacy students," Blake explained quietly. "Children of wealthy donors or political figures. They live in the East Dormitory and mostly keep to themselves." He'd had limited interactions with them during his time at Evergreen, and those few encounters had left him unimpressed with their attitudes. The group paused near one of the Procyon students, who was attempting to navigate the refreshment table. One of the Legacy students, a tall, athletic boy with perfectly styled blonde hair, said something that made his companions laugh. The Proxion's eyes swirled with colors that Blake now recognized as distress. "This is unacceptable." Thorn rustled beside them, branch-like appendages stiffening. Before any of them could react, Lyra was already moving across the room with fluid grace, inserting herself between the Legacy students and the Procyon. Her star-filled eyes seemed to glow more intensely as she addressed the group, her wind chime voice carrying despite the ambient noise. "You cause distress to one under protection of the integration protocols," she stated clearly. "This violates both Earth hospitality customs and Galactic Council behavioral standards." The blond boy looked momentarily taken aback before his expression shifted to amusement. Well, the Floor Eater has opinions about proper behavior. That's rich." His companions snickered, but Blake noticed they kept a cautious distance from Lyra, as if uncertain of what she might be capable of. "Cultural differences are expected and protected," Lyra continued, undeterred. "Intentional cruelty is neither." By now, Blake and Madison had reached them, with Thorn close behind. Blake positioned himself beside Lyra, facing the Legacy group. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, keeping his voice level despite the anger building in his chest. "No problem," the blond boy replied with exaggerated politeness. "Just getting to know our alien visitors. Isn't that what this mixer is for?" Tyler, one of his companions, a girl with elaborately styled red hair, tugged at his arm. "Administrator Hayes is watching." Sure enough, the school's administrator was making his way toward their group, his expression concerned. Tyler rolled his eyes but stepped back. "We'll continue our cultural exchange another time," he said with a smirk before turning away with his entourage. The Proxion's eyes were still swirling with distressed colors, but as Lyra spoke to them in a soft, melodious language Blake didn't recognize, the colors gradually shifted to calmer blues and greens. "Are you okay?" Madison asked the Procyon when Lyra finished speaking. The small alien nodded, their eyes now a steady lavender. "I am unharmed." The tall one's words were confusing, but Lyra explained their intent. Blake frowned. "What did he say to you?" The Procyon hesitated. "He suggested I might taste like the berry juice I was consuming, and his companions found this humorous." I did not understand the implication until Lyra explained that it was a threat disguised as humor. Blake felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Threatening to eat an alien student, even as a joke, crossed a line from rude into potentially dangerous territory. The integration program was already politically controversial. Incidents like this could be used by opponents to argue that different species couldn't peacefully coexist. "We should report this," Madison said firmly. "That kind of behavior needs consequences." Lyra's gossamer hair moved in a pattern that seemed to indicate disagreement. "The human authority figure has observed, and Proxians prefer resolution without escalation. Reporting would cause greater distress to Milo than the original offense." The Procyon, Milo, apparently, confirmed this with a nod, their eyes briefly flashing grateful pink. "Still," Blake insisted, "if they're targeting alien students, the administration needs to know." "Perhaps there is a middle path," Thorn suggested, their bark-like features arranged in what Blake was beginning to recognize as thoughtfulness. "Documentation without immediate action. Create a record of concerning behavior patterns that can be presented if needed." Madison nodded slowly. "That makes sense. We document everything but let the alien students decide if and when to escalate. As they discussed the logistics of this approach, Blake found himself studying Lyra with new appreciation. She had responded to the situation with immediate protective instinct, but also cultural sensitivity to the Proxians' preferences. There was a depth to her that belied her seemingly ethereal appearance. The remainder of the mixer passed without further incident, though Blake noticed Tyler and his group watching their multi-species gathering with barely disguised disdain from across the room. By the time the event concluded, Blake, Madison, Lyra, Thorn, Milo, and several other students, both human and alien, had exchanged contact information and agreed to meet regularly, ostensibly as a cultural exchange study group, but with the unspoken additional purpose of providing support and safety for the alien students as they navigated Evergreen's complex social landscape. As Blake walked back to his dormitory later that evening, he reflected on how dramatically his priorities had shifted in just one day. That morning, his focus had been entirely on his MIT application and academic achievements. Now, he found himself involved in what felt like something much larger and more significant: the practical, day-to-day work of building bridges between different worlds. His tablet pinged with a message from his father, asking about his progress on the aerospace engineering project they had discussed before the term began. Blake stared at it for a long moment before typing a brief reply that he was working on it and would update soon. It wasn't exactly a lie. He did intend to continue his project. But for the first time, he found himself questioning whether the path his parents had always assumed for him was the only one worth pursuing. The galaxy, it seemed, offered far more possibilities than he had previously considered. With that thought in mind, he entered his dormitory building, already looking forward to the next day and whatever new discoveries it might bring. The following weeks at Evergreen Academy established a new rhythm for Blake. His mornings began early as usual, but now included breakfast with a growing circle of human and alien friends. His classes remained challenging, but the Galactic Civilizations course quickly became his favorite, offering insights into worlds and cultures he had never imagined. And his evenings, once dedicated solely to additional study, now often involved cultural exchange sessions where students shared aspects of their homeworlds. Lyra became a regular presence in his life, her quiet wisdom and occasional startling insights challenging him to reconsider assumptions he hadn't even realized he held. Madison, too, became an important friend, her enthusiasm for xenoanthropology complementing his more analytical approach to understanding alien cultures. Together with Thorn, Milo, and several other students, they formed what came to be known informally as the Convergence Group, a multi-species gathering dedicated to genuine cultural exchange and mutual support. Their first official meeting took place in one of the smaller study rooms in the library, with 9 students present, 5 humans and 4 aliens. "I think we should establish some ground rules," Madison suggested once everyone had settled. "This should be a space where everyone feels comfortable sharing without judgment." Agreed. Thorn rustled, their branch-like appendages shifting. Perhaps each species could outline particular sensitivities or taboos to avoid misunderstandings. What followed was a fascinating hour of cultural exchange, with each alien student describing aspects of their world that humans might find surprising or confusing. Milo explained that for Proxians, eye color changes were involuntary emotional indicators, the equivalent of human facial expressions, but impossible to disguise. This is why staring directly at a Proxian's eyes is considered invasive, they explained, their own eyes shifting to a thoughtful blue. "You are essentially reading our emotional state without permission." Like mind reading, one of the human students, Rachel, nodded in understanding. "That makes sense why you'd find it uncomfortable." Thorn shared that arboreals experience time differently than humans or most other species. "What you perceive as a moment of stillness," they explained, "might be for me a complex sensory experience. Similarly, what seems a long contemplative pause to you is often an arboreal's quick decision." Blake found all of this fascinating, filing away these cultural insights for future reference. When it came Lyra's turn to share, however, he found himself leaning forward with particular interest. "Lysithians perceive reality on multiple layers simultaneously," she began, her star-filled eyes surveying their small group. "What you see as physical space we experience with additional dimensions of energy patterns and temporal echoes. Temporal echoes? Blake questioned, like seeing the past. Lyra's gossamer hair rippled in what he now recognized as thoughtful consideration. Not exactly seeing. More, sensing impressions of what has been and probability patterns of what might be. It is difficult to explain in linear languages. Madison was scribbling notes furiously. That's incredible. Does that mean you can predict the future? No. Lyra's wind chime voice took on a more serious tone. We perceive probability clusters, not definitive outcomes. The future remains unwritten, shaped by countless decisions and random factors. We simply see more of the branching possibilities than most species. Blake found this concept both fascinating and slightly unsettling. Is that why Lysithians have been observing Earth? Because our development patterns are unpredictable. Lyra's star-filled eyes fixed on him with that penetrating intensity he was becoming accustomed to. Partially, humans occupy an unusual position in probability space. Your species makes choices that often defy statistical prediction models. This makes you both interesting and potentially concerning to more deterministic cultures. Concerning how? Rachel asked, her expression worried. Some council species prefer stability and predictability in their galactic neighbors, Lyra explained. Humans introduce variables that complicate long-term forecasting. Blake thought about this, connecting it to what he knew of Earth's relatively rapid technological development compared to the timescales mentioned in their xenohistory readings. So were the wild cards of the galaxy? Lyra's hair swirled in what might have been amusement. An apt metaphor. Yes, in many ways. Humans represent an element of cosmic uncertainty. The conversation continued, with each species offering insights into their perceptions and cultural frameworks. By the end of the meeting, Blake felt his understanding of the universe had expanded significantly. These weren't just aliens with different physical characteristics. They were beings who experienced reality itself in fundamentally different ways. As they packed up their materials, Blake found himself walking beside Lyra. "Thank you for sharing about your perception," he said quietly. "I can't imagine what it's like to experience the world that way, but it helps me understand you better." Lyra's star-filled eyes regarded him thoughtfully. Understanding need not require identical experience. Recognition of difference is itself a form of connection. Blake smiled. "That's profound. Is that a Lysithian saying?" "No." Her wind chime voice carried a hint of what might have been humor. "It is simply truth." As they left the library together, Blake noticed Tyler and two of his legacy friends watching from across the main hall, their expressions unreadable, but their attention clearly focused on the multi-species group. Blake felt a protective instinct rise within him, and he subtly positioned himself between their gaze and Lyra. She noticed, of course. He was beginning to think Lyra noticed everything. "They pose no immediate threat," she said softly. "Maybe not immediate," Blake agreed. "But I don't trust their intentions." "Trust is earned through demonstration of character over time," Lyra observed. "They have not yet had opportunity to earn yours. Or to lose it," Blake pointed out. Lyra's gossamer hair rippled in acknowledgement. "A fair assessment. You are becoming more perceptive, Blake Turner." Something in the way she said it made Blake wonder if she meant more than simple observation skills. But before he could ask, Madison joined them, and the conversation shifted to plans for their next meeting. That evening, Blake received another message from his parents, a reminder about the upcoming MIT application deadline and a suggestion that he focus more on his aerospace engineering project and less on extracurricular distractions. They had clearly heard about his involvement with the alien students, though how exactly they knew was unclear. Blake stared at the message for a long time, conflicting emotions churning within him. His parents weren't wrong about the importance of the MIT application. It had been his goal for years, and the deadline was indeed approaching. But he resented the implication that his new friendships were mere distractions rather than valuable experiences in their own right. After careful consideration, he sent a measured response, assuring them that his academic work remained a priority while gently suggesting that the integration program offered unique learning opportunities that could actually strengthen his application. Their reply came quickly. "Just make sure you're not getting sidetracked. The competition for MIT doesn't allow for divided attention." Blake sighed, setting aside his tablet. His parents had always supported his academic ambitions, but sometimes their intensity felt more like pressure than encouragement. Still, they wanted what was best for him, even if their vision of best sometimes felt narrowly defined. With that thought, he turned his attention to his aerospace engineering project, a theoretical design for improved gravitational compensation in interstellar vehicles. The work engaged his mind as it always had, but now he found himself wondering about how different species might approach the same problems differently. How would an arboreal's different time perception affect their spacecraft design philosophy? What might Lysithian multidimensional awareness contribute to navigation systems? These questions hadn't occurred to him before meeting Lyra and the others, but now they seemed obvious and relevant. Blake made a note to bring up these questions at their next convergence meeting. Perhaps the intersection of different species' perspectives could yield insights beyond what any single approach might discover alone. As he worked into the night, Blake realized that despite his parents' concerns, his new friendships weren't distracting him from his goals. They were expanding them in ways he hadn't anticipated but increasingly valued. The incident that would change everything happened 3 weeks into the term, on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. Blake was crossing the campus quad after his advanced physics class when he spotted Lyra sitting alone beneath one of the ancient oak trees that dotted the grounds. She appeared to be in a state of deep meditation, her gossamer hair floating more freely than usual and her star-filled eyes half closed. He hesitated, not wanting to disturb her, but she seemed to sense his presence even from a distance. Her eyes opened fully, and she beckoned him over with a graceful gesture. "Your thoughts are loud today, Blake Turner," she said as he settled on the grass beside her. Blake smiled, having grown accustomed to Lyra's occasional seemingly psychic insights. "Just thinking about my MIT application. The deadline's coming up fast." "This concerns you," she observed. It wasn't a question. "A bit," he admitted. "It's been my goal for so long, and my parents have such high expectations. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough, or if I'm getting distracted by—" He trailed off, realizing how it might sound. "By friendships with non-humans." Lyra completed his thought, no judgment in her wind chime voice. Blake winced. "That's not what I meant. It's just, your priorities are evolving while external expectations remain fixed," Lyra said simply. "This creates internal discord. Put that way, it seems so obvious." "Yes, exactly. I still want to go to MIT and study aerospace engineering, but I'm also discovering all these new possibilities I never considered before." Lyra's gossamer hair moved in what he now recognized as her equivalent of a thoughtful nod. Evolution of purpose is natural and beneficial. Fixed paths rarely accommodate growth. "Try telling that to my parents," Blake sighed. "They've had my future mapped out since I was 10. "Perhaps they fear uncertainty," Lyra suggested. "Many beings do. They seek to create illusions of control through rigid planning." Blake considered this. His parents had always been methodical, strategic people. It was part of what made them successful engineers. But Lyra was right. Their careful planning could sometimes feel like an attempt to control variables in an inherently unpredictable universe. "How do Lysithians handle uncertainty?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Especially if you can see probability patterns." "We embrace it," Lyra replied, her star-filled eyes reflecting pinpricks of light. "Seeing multiple possibilities does not eliminate uncertainty. It merely illustrates its vastness. We understand that the unknown is not to be feared but explored." Blake was about to respond when shouts from across the quad caught their attention. A group of students had gathered near the science building entrance, phones raised to record something. With a sinking feeling, Blake recognized Tyler's distinctive blonde hair among them. "We should check that out," he said, rising quickly to his feet. Lyra nodded. Her usual grace slightly accelerated as she stood and moved with him toward the commotion. As they drew closer, Blake could see that Milo was at the center of the group, their small form pressed against the building wall, while Tyler and his friends crowded around them. The Proxian's eyes were swirling rapidly with colors that Blake now recognized as extreme distress and fear. "Come on, we just want to see what happens," Tyler was saying, his tone falsely casual as he held out what appeared to be a cup of cafeteria juice. "Proxians are supposed to have interesting reactions to citrus, right? It's for our xenobiology project." "That is incorrect information," Milo replied, their voice trembling. And unwanted contact violates integration protocols. We're not making contact, one of Tyler's friends argued. We're conducting scientific research. Isn't that what this whole program is about? Learning about each other. Blake pushed through the circle of onlookers, Lyra close behind him. What's going on here? He demanded, positioning himself between Milo and the legacy students. Tyler rolled his eyes. Relax, Turner. We're just doing a little experiment. No harm intended. Forcing substances on anyone against their will is harm, Blake countered, feeling his anger rise. And you know it. The substance would cause severe dermis deterioration to Procyon biology, Lyra added, her wind chime voice carrying a hard edge Blake had never heard before. This is not experimentation, but deliberate harm. Tyler's expression shifted, surprise briefly replacing his arrogant smirk. We didn't know that, he claimed, though Blake doubted his sincerity. Knowledge of potential harm was available in mandatory orientation materials, Lyra stated coldly. Ignorance in this case represents either negligence or intentional disregard for safety. By now, a larger crowd had gathered, including several faculty members hurrying across the quad. Blake noticed Madison among them, her face tight with concern as she pushed her way forward. This ends now, Blake said firmly, making eye contact with each of the legacy students in turn. Leave Milo alone. Or what? Tyler challenged, taking a step closer to Blake. You'll report us? For offering a drink. We have documentation of a pattern of behavior, Madison said, having reached them and immediately grasping the situation. Multiple incidents targeting non-human students. The administration takes integration protocol violations very seriously. Tyler's confidence seemed to falter slightly as he glanced at the approaching faculty members. Whatever. This is boring anyway. He deliberately poured the cup's contents onto the ground near Milo's feet, making the Procyon flinch back. See you around, aliens. As Tyler and his friends dispersed, Blake turned to Milo, whose eyes were still cycling through distress colors. Are you okay? They didn't force you to touch anything, did they? Milo shook their head, eyes gradually settling into a calmer blue. No physical contact occurred, but the threat was disturbing. This cannot continue, Lyra stated, her gossamer hair nearly flat against her head, a sign Blake now recognized indicated intense emotion. The pattern escalates. Madison nodded grimly, showing her tablet with notes documenting previous incidents. This is the third harassment event this week, and they're getting more aggressive. We need to take this to Administrator Hayes. Blake agreed, though he worried about potential backlash. Tyler's family were significant donors to Evergreen, and whispered rumors suggested his father had political connections that had helped secure Earth's place in the Galactic Council in the first place. Before they could discuss further, Dr. Reyes arrived, quickly assessing the situation. What happened here? She asked, her keen eyes taking in Milo's distress and the spilled liquid on the ground. As Madison explained, Dr. Reyes's expression grew increasingly grave. When Madison finished and showed her the documentation of previous incidents, the professor's normally warm demeanor had hardened to steel. This is unacceptable, she stated firmly. Come with me, all of you. We're going to Administrator Hayes' office immediately. As they followed Dr. Reyes across campus, Blake walked beside Lyra, who seemed unusually tense. Are you okay? He asked quietly. Her star-filled eyes met his, and for a brief moment, Blake had the unsettling sensation of looking into vast depths beyond his comprehension. I am concerned, she replied simply. Incidents like these have historical precedents with unfortunate outcomes. Something in her tone sent a chill through Blake. What kind of outcomes? Lyra's gossamer hair rippled in a pattern he couldn't interpret. Integration efforts have failed on other worlds when initial conflicts were not properly addressed. Small aggressions unchecked become larger confrontations. That won't happen here, Blake assured her, though he felt less confident than he sounded. The administration will take action. Perhaps, Lyra said, her wind chime voice carrying a note of something that might have been doubt. But institutions often prioritize stability over justice when confronted with difficult choices. Her words proved unfortunately prophetic. The meeting with Administrator Hayes began promisingly enough, with the administrator expressing appropriate concern and reviewing Madison's documentation carefully. But when Dr. Reyes suggested immediate disciplinary action against Tyler and his friends, including possible suspension, his demeanor changed. "We need to be careful about jumping to conclusions," he cautioned, setting aside Madison's tablet. "These could be simple cultural misunderstandings rather than deliberate harassment. The integration program is new territory for everyone involved." "With respect, Administrator," Blake interjected. "Offering a substance known to be harmful to Procyon biology goes beyond misunderstanding." "Alleged to be harmful," Administrator Hayes corrected. "We have no evidence actual harm was intended or would have occurred. Without testing the substance in question, testing would require deliberately harming a Procyon," Madison pointed out, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Surely that's not what you're suggesting?" Administrator Hayes sighed. "Of course not. I'm simply saying that from a disciplinary standpoint, we need clear evidence of malicious intent, not just poor judgment." "The pattern establishes intent," Lyra said quietly, her star-filled eyes fixed on the administrator. "Sequential events targeting different non-human students indicate systematic behavior rather than isolated misunderstandings." The administrator seemed uncomfortable under Lyra's gaze. "I understand your concerns, and I assure you they'll be addressed appropriately. I'll speak with the students involved and make it clear that any confirmed harassment will have serious consequences." "And in the meantime," Dr. Reyes pressed, "these students need protection. We'll increase faculty presence in common areas," Administrator Hayes offered. "And perhaps it would be advisable for non-human students to travel in groups until this situation cools down." Blake exchanged glances with Madison and Lyra. The administrator's response was clearly inadequate, placing the burden of adjustment on the victims rather than addressing the perpetrator's behavior directly. "Is that all?" Madison asked, not bothering to hide her disappointment. Administrator Hayes straightened in his chair. "Ms. Grant, I understand your frustration, but these situations require careful handling. The integration program has political implications that extend beyond our campus. Hasty disciplinary actions without irrefutable evidence could jeopardize the entire initiative." And there it was, the real issue. Politics and optics were taking precedence over the safety and well-being of the alien students. Blake felt a surge of anger, but before he could speak, Lyra placed a gentle hand on his arm. "We understand institutional constraints," she said, her wind chime voice neutral. "Thank you for your time and consideration." As they left the administrative building, a heavy silence hung over the group. Finally, Madison broke it with a frustrated sigh. "So that's it. They just get away with it." "Not necessarily," Dr. Reyes said thoughtfully. "Administrator Hayes has institutional limitations, but that doesn't mean we're without options. The integration program has oversight beyond Evergreen." "The Galactic Council representatives," Blake realized. Dr. Reyes nodded. "Ambassador Collins expressed particular interest in your group's cross-cultural initiatives. Perhaps it's time to invite him to observe one of your meetings." "That could work," Madison agreed, her expression brightening. "If he sees firsthand how the alien students are being treated, he might apply pressure from the diplomatic side." Milo, who had been quiet throughout the meeting, spoke up hesitantly. "Such escalation could create additional attention that might be uncomfortable for many non-humans." "Milo's concern is valid," Lyra acknowledged. "External intervention sometimes creates unintended consequences." Blake thought for a moment. "What if we tried a different approach first? Something more direct, but less official?" "What did you have in mind?" Madison asked. "A cultural demonstration," Blake suggested, the idea taking shape as he spoke. "Something public that shows the positive aspects of integration. Make it harder for Tyler and his friends to operate in the shadows by bringing everything into the light." Dr. Reyes looked intrigued. "Like a cultural exhibition?" "More like a series of them," Blake elaborated. "Each species could share something meaningful from their culture. Food, music, art, whatever feels right. We make it open to the whole school, get as many people involved as possible. Community building through shared experience," Lyra observed, her gossamer hair lifting in what Blake now recognized as approval. "This has merit. And if harassment continues despite these positive efforts," Dr. Reyes added, "we'll have even stronger grounds for formal intervention." They spent the next hour outlining a plan for what they decided to call the Convergence Festival, a week-long series of cultural exchanges culminating in a school-wide celebration. Each alien species would host a day focused on sharing aspects of their world, with human students encouraged to participate and learn. As they parted ways, Blake found himself walking back to his dormitory with Lyra and Madison. The autumn sun was setting over the forest surrounding Evergreen, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed to complement Lyra's floating gossamer hair. "Do you think this will work?" Madison asked quietly. "Will a festival really change anything?" "Change rarely comes from single actions," Lyra replied, her star-filled eyes reflecting the sunset. "But meaningful connections between individuals can shift probability patterns in favorable directions." Blake smiled at her characteristically philosophical response. "In other words, it's worth trying." "Yes," Lyra agreed, her wind chime voice warm. "It is always worth trying to build bridges of understanding, even when outcomes remain uncertain." As they reached the point where their paths would diverge, Blake to the west dormitory, Madison and Lyra to the east, Blake felt a strange reluctance to part ways. Something about the day's events had deepened his connection to both of them in ways he couldn't quite articulate. "I'll start drafting the proposal tonight," Madison said. "We can review it at breakfast tomorrow. I will consult with other Lysithians about appropriate cultural elements to share," Lyra added. "Some practices require adaptation for different atmospheric conditions." Blake nodded. "I'll talk to some of the other human students, try to build support." He hesitated, then added, "Thank you both for everything today." Madison smiled warmly. "That's what friends do." Lyra's gossamer hair rippled in a pattern that seemed to convey similar sentiment. "Indeed. Until tomorrow, Blake Turner." As Blake watched them walk away, he realized that something fundamental had shifted within him. The MIT application still mattered, his parents' expectations still existed, but they no longer defined the boundaries of his world. The universe had expanded, offering possibilities he was only beginning to comprehend. With that thought, he turned toward his dormitory, already making mental notes of which students might be receptive to joining their cultural initiative. The future remained uncertain, but for perhaps the first time in his life, Blake found that uncertainty exciting rather than anxiety-inducing. Lyra, it seemed, was right. The unknown wasn't something to fear, but to explore. The following week was a whirlwind of activity as Blake, Madison, Lyra, and their growing circle of supporters worked to organize the Convergence Festival. What had begun as a small idea quickly expanded into something much larger, with faculty members offering support and even Administrator Hayes cautiously approving the initiative, perhaps seeing it as a way to demonstrate Evergreen's commitment to the integration program without directly addressing the harassment issues. Each morning, the Convergence group met for breakfast to coordinate the day's efforts. Each afternoon, they reached out to different student groups to build support. And each evening, they gathered in the library to plan the cultural presentations that would form the heart of the festival. Blake found himself more engaged and energized than he had been in months, perhaps years. There was something profoundly satisfying about working toward a goal that extended beyond his own academic achievements, something that might actually make a difference in the lives of others. His parents, predictably, were less enthusiastic. "I'm concerned about your focus, Blake," his mother said during their weekly video call. "Your aerospace engineering project submission deadline is next week, and you've barely mentioned it in our last few conversations." "The project is on track," Blake assured her, which was mostly true. He had been working on it late at night after his festival planning sessions. "But this cultural initiative is important too. It's a unique opportunity to build connections with species we've only recently encountered." His father's expression remained skeptical. "Connections are valuable, but priorities matter. MIT won't care about your alien festival if your application materials aren't exceptional." Blake felt a flash of irritation but kept his voice level. "Actually, Dad, I think they might. The admissions committee looks for leadership and innovative thinking, not just technical skills. This project demonstrates both." His parents exchanged a glance that Blake had seen many times before, their silent communication when they thought he was being naively idealistic. "Just make sure you're not overextending yourself," his mother said finally. "Your future depends on these next few weeks." After the call ended, Blake sat at his desk for a long moment, conflicting emotions washing over him. His parents weren't wrong about the importance of the MIT application. It had been his dream for years. But their narrow focus on that single goal felt increasingly restrictive as his own horizons expanded. A gentle knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Ethan poked his head in. "Hey, Blake, there's someone here to see you." To his surprise, Lyra stood in the corridor outside their room, her gossamer hair moving gently despite the absence of any breeze. Dormitory visits between genders were strictly regulated at Evergreen, but apparently the rules hadn't anticipated alien students whose gender categories might not align with human ones. "Lyra," Blake stepped into the hallway. "Is everything okay? May we speak privately?" she asked, her wind chime voice pitched lower than usual. "There is a matter requiring discussion." Something in her tone concerned him. "Of course. Let's walk outside." Once they reached the quiet path that wound through the woods behind the dormitories, Lyra spoke. "I have observed your interaction with your parents. It causes you distress." Blake blinked in surprise. "You saw my video call?" "How?" Lyra's star-filled eyes regarded him steadily. "Lysithians perceive energy patterns across distances. Your communication generated distinctive emotional resonances. You can sense emotions remotely?" Blake wasn't sure whether to be fascinated or unsettled by this revelation. "Not with precision," Lyra clarified. "Only general patterns of emotional energy, and only from beings with whom I have established connection." Her gossamer hair rippled in what might have been embarrassment. "I did not intentionally observe your private communication. The emotional intensity drew my attention." Blake considered this. The idea that Lyra could sense his emotional states was surprising, but strangely, it didn't bother him as much as it probably should have. "It's okay. I'm not upset. Just surprised." They walked in silence for a moment before Lyra spoke again. "Your parents value your future success. This is not incompatible with your current activities, yet tension exists." "What?" Blake sighed. "They have a very specific vision of success. MIT, aerospace engineering, following their career path. Anything outside that narrow definition feels like a distraction to them." "And to you?" Lyra asked perceptively. "Is their vision still your vision?" The question struck Blake with unexpected force. Was it? He had pursued the MIT goal for so long that he had rarely stopped to question whether it truly aligned with his evolving interests and values. "I don't know anymore," he admitted finally. "I still love aerospace engineering. The idea of designing vessels that could travel between stars fascinates me. But after meeting you and the others, learning about different worlds and perspectives, it feels like there's so much more I could be doing." Lyra's gossamer hair lifted in a pattern that seemed to indicate approval. "Expansion of purpose is growth, not betrayal of original intent. The most effective vessels in space are those designed with adaptability to navigate unexpected conditions." Blake smiled at her metaphor. "You're saying I can pursue my engineering goals while still remaining open to new possibilities?" "Precisely," Lyra confirmed. "Fixed trajectories rarely accommodate the true complexity of cosmic journeys or life paths." As they continued their walk, Blake found himself sharing more about his relationship with his parents, their expectations, and his own uncertainties about the future. Lyra listened with that intense focus he had come to appreciate, occasionally offering insights that were both alien in perspective and remarkably applicable to his human concerns. "May I ask something of your world?" Blake said eventually, as their path looped back toward campus. "You've heard so much about my family and culture, but you rarely speak of your own." Lyra was quiet for a moment, her star-filled eyes seeming to look beyond their surroundings. "Lysithea is difficult to describe in Earth languages. Our world exists partially in dimensions your species does not yet perceive." "Try," Blake encouraged her. "Even if I can't fully understand." Lyra's gossamer hair moved in what might have been appreciation of his interest. "Lysithea orbits a binary star system, one visible, one not visible to human perception. The interaction between these stars creates energy patterns that shaped our evolution. Our cities are built not just in physical space, but in harmonious alignment with these energy flows." She continued, describing a world that sounded equal parts magical and scientifically advanced. Lysithians could manipulate energy fields in ways that appeared almost mystical, yet their society was structured around rigorous ethical principles regarding such manipulations. Our inclusion in the Galactic Council was controversial, she admitted. Some species find our perceptual differences disturbing. Others question whether beings who experience reality so differently can truly integrate with standard galactic society. That sounds like prejudice, Blake observed. It is, Lyra agreed simply. Fear of difference exists across all sentient species, though its manifestations vary. Humans are not unique in this respect, merely newer to interspecies relations. As they reached the edge of campus, Blake noticed Madison hurrying toward them, tablet in hand and expression troubled. "There you are," she called. "We have a problem." Blake felt a sinking sensation. "What happened?" Madison handed him her tablet. On the screen was a campus message board post from Tyler. Convergence Festival, Cultural Appropriation or Alien Invasion Strategy. The truth about why certain species are really interested in Earth. The post continued with a mix of distorted facts and outright fabrications, suggesting that the cultural festival was actually a cover for alien species to gather intelligence about Earth's vulnerabilities. It specifically mentioned Lysithians as a secretive species with unknown abilities and questionable loyalties to the Council. "This is ridiculous," Blake said, anger rising as he scrolled through the comments, some dismissive, but others expressing concern or agreement with Tyler's paranoid theories. "How many people have seen this?" "It's the most viewed post on the board today," Madison replied grimly. "And it's spreading to external networks too." Lyra's gossamer hair had flattened against her head, a sign Blake now recognized indicated distress or concern. This follows historical patterns of fear-mongering that precede integration failures on other worlds. Despite Tyler's attempts to derail the festival, Blake and his friends refused to be intimidated. The day of the Convergence Festival arrived with the entire campus transformed into a celebration of interspecies harmony. Each alien culture had a designated area showcasing their art, food, music, and traditions. The turning point came when Blake stood before the gathered crowd, Lyra beside him. "Today we're making a choice about who we want to be in this galaxy," he announced. "Do we let fear divide us? Or do we embrace the incredible opportunity to learn from each other?" With cameras recording, Blake and Lyra demonstrated the Lysithian floor-eating ritual, explaining its cultural significance. One by one, students joined them. First Madison, then Rachel, then dozens more, including faculty and even Administrator Hayes himself. The powerful image of humans and aliens sharing a meal together on the floor spread across media networks worldwide. Tyler and his friends watched from the periphery, their influence diminishing as more students participated. When Ambassador Collins arrived with Galactic Council representatives, they witnessed not division, but genuine cultural exchange and friendship. "This is what true integration looks like," the ambassador announced, officially recognizing Evergreen Academy as a model for future programs. 2 months later, Blake received his MIT acceptance letter alongside an unexpected offer, a position in the newly established Interspecies Engineering Initiative, combining aerospace technology with insights from alien cultures. "You were right," Blake told Lyra as they celebrated with their friends. "The universe offers more possibilities than any fixed path could contain." Lyra's gossamer hair swirled happily. "Your species' unpredictability sometimes creates beautiful outcomes. This is why Lysithians find humans so fascinating." As the academic year ended, the Convergence Group's approach became a template for integration programs worldwide. The students who had once filmed Lyra eating from the floor now participated enthusiastically in cultural exchanges, their perspective forever changed by the simple act of kneeling down in friendship. Blake realized that his greatest accomplishment wasn't his MIT acceptance or even the successful festival, but the bridges built between worlds, proof that understanding begins not with grand policies, but with individuals willing to step outside their comfort zones and kneel beside those who seem different. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.